from my perspective, hope is not a strategy, and it's not always comfortable to think about these things. But I certainly am not saying these things are going to happen to any of our children, but, maybe it's a friend, maybe it's a loved one, and you just never know, what's going to happen or what the future holds.
Welcome to Tilt Parenting, a podcast featuring interviews and conversations aimed at inspiring, informing, and supporting parents raising differently wired kids. I'm your host, Debbie Reber. This week's episode is a must-listen to if you have a teen, a tween, or will someday have a teen or tween. So yeah, pretty much all parents. My guest is veteran prosecutor for the city of Los Angeles and former troubled teen, Jonathan Cristall. 5 years ago, Jonathan set out to write the book he needed himself as the father of 3 teenage boys. And the result is What They Don't Teach Teens: Life Safety Skills for Teens and the Adults Who Care for Them. Drawing on his experience on both sides of teenagehood and the law, Jonathan is on a mission to teach 21st century life skills to young people and their families. I invited Jonathan to the show to talk about these skills and strategies needed for modern adolescents, what they are, and why parents, especially parents of differently wired kids, need to understand the different world their children are growing up in. We talk about interacting with police and personal rights, physical and internet online safety, street smarts, sexual consent and sextortion, and much more. And we only cover a fraction of what's in the book, so I highly encourage you to check it out. Lastly, I want to give a quick shout out to 3 new supporters of the podcast. Thank you so much to Pam Crane, Ryan Brown, and Aaron Hill for helping to support the production costs associated with this show. If you get a lot out of this podcast and would like to help me cover the cost of its production, please consider joining my Patreon campaign. On Patreon, you can sign up to make a small monthly contribution to support the show. Just go to patreon.com/tiltparenting to learn more. And now here is my conversation with Jonathan Cristall. Hey, Jonathan, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Debbie. Thanks for having me.
Of course. I was super intrigued when I got your email telling me about your book and the work that you do. And I have had a couple of conversations, that have talked about safety in a general sense, but I was really intrigued by your book. And I just thought this would be an interesting topic to bring to my listeners. So as a way of introduction, tell us a little bit about yourself, kind of who you are in the world and your personal why for this work that you're doing.
Absolutely. So again, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. Jonathan Cristall is my name. I live here in Los Angeles, and for the last 20 years or so, I've been a prosecutor for the LA City Attorney's Office. It was pretty unlikely I'd ever become a lawyer, let alone a prosecutor enforcing the laws, because I used to break a few laws as a teenager. I was a troubled teen. I was a good kid. I got pivoted off path at some point. I had a difficult family situation, and I started doing things I shouldn't have been doing. I shouldn't have lived through my teen years, but, here I am, thankfully. I'm also trained and certified to teach on sexual violence prevention with a very large nonprofit here in LA. But I suppose the most important thing to know about me is I'm a father to 3 sons. My wife, Lisa, and I have 3 boys, all teenagers. And I don't know, about maybe like 6 or so years ago, Lisa, my wife, says to me, almost like as an aside, hey, it's time we got to start teaching the older boys about sexual consent. And, of course, it was that time. And it started me thinking about, all the other things that we should be teaching them as parents or caregivers. And I actually made a list of course, sexual consent, their rights with the police. I added, what to do and not to do when they get stopped by the police when driving, their digital footprints, cyberbullying, sextortion, street smarts, dating violence. And I was like, well, there has to be a resource out there. There has to be a book that we as parents and caregivers can, just look at and help our children learn the information. And there wasn't. And so with the encouragement of my wife, who urged me to write the book I was looking for, I wrote What They Don't Teach Teens, and it came out this past October 2020. And thus far, it's been, very well received.
Yeah, again, it was just a different topic than I've seen. And you really do talk about such important issues, but issues that as a parent can feel overwhelming or super uncomfortable. I've done a couple of episodes on pornography and the importance of talking about pornography. And so we've had a couple of conversations about these issues, but talking about these things and reading your book, it can feel really heavy, right? It can feel scary to read and just to imagine our teens being in these situations, so I could see there might be resistance. And I'm curious to know around parents who don't want to know, or don't want to go there because it feels too heavy, yet we want our kids to be prepared. So I'm just curious, how do you help parents kind of open up to hearing your message?
Well, I'm so glad you've asked me that because obviously I've been doing, a fair amount of publicity around the book and events, but I don't think anyone's asked me that yet. And it's a really interesting question. We could probably spend all of our time trying to just digest that. But it's, there's really two schools of thought. There's, the parents who are really plugged in and totally understand why the issues in the book, or maybe not all of them, maybe all the topics don't resonate with every parent, but some of them do, for this at least segment of parents, and they do understand like why their son or daughter has to understand what sexual consent is and what it is not, and the other topics. And then there's others who don't appreciate it, and that's okay. And generally, they think that those things happen to, to other people's kids. And maybe they're right. Who can say? But, from my perspective, hope is not a strategy. And it's not always comfortable to think about these things. But I certainly am not saying these things are going to happen to any of our children. But, maybe it's a friend. Maybe it's a loved one. And you just never know, what's going to happen or what the future holds. And the other point I like to bring up is the information is just interesting. It's good information to have. And as important as math, history, science, those traditional school subjects are, I'd like to argue that this is more pertinent and in many ways more important because these are life skills that are going to apply in one way or another outside of school. And the last thing I'd say on it is that, one thing I've been hearing continually from readers, whether they're teenagers, parents, caregivers, teachers, is that it's bringing, and this was my intention, it's bringing them a sense of calm. Because when you have the information and the realities of these issues and where the risks are and where the myths are, it brings you a sense of calm because you know how to handle the unexpected should it happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And the subtitle, I'll just say for listeners, is, so the book is What They Don't Teach Teens. The subtitle is Life Safety Skills for Teens and the Adults Who Care for Them. And so, we spent a lot of time talking about life skills in general and independent skills and what we need to do to get our kids ready for launching. But we don't often talk about these safety skills. And I think you're absolutely right. That knowledge, and you do go into such great detail, like the information on your rights in police interactions was fascinating to me. It's so detailed and it is empowering to have a better sense of what are your rights as a person? What can they ask you? What should you do? What are the ramifications of doing X, Y, and Z? I could see how that would give someone a sense of at least preparedness, right?
For sure. And the book is really 11 books in one because, there's 3 sections, as you saw, on sexual violence and misconduct, 4 chapters there, street safety and your rights with the police, 3 chapters there, and then 4 chapters on digital safety. And so, you pick and choose. Maybe you want to read it cover to cover, but I'm finding that most people don't. They pick and choose the chapters that are resonating right then for the young person they're caring for. And, you keep it on hand. With respect to your rights, the hardest part, or not just the rights, every chapter, the hardest part for me writing this book was, keeping it concise. It's harder to write short than it is long. So how do I take, a topic like your rights, and instead of writing a whole book about it, write an effective chapter and make it accessible to anyone who might pick it up, regardless of age. And I appreciate your kind words about that chapter. And I think the others are similar, because there's a lot to cover in a short amount of time or space. And I want to give the readers the essentials, the information they just have to have. You got to know this stuff. And if you want to learn more, go ahead. But here are the essentials. And then, again, tying back to your comment about the chapter on your rights, obviously, in light of what's happening, in this country with racial injustice and the criminal justice system and violence that's inflicted on the citizens or the residents of our country by the police, particularly people of color. I'm glad to see that coming into, the social consciousness, because, I wrote this book over a period of 5 years, and I wrote that chapter years ago, and I very clearly state in there that we need criminal justice reform. I respect police and the difficult jobs they're doing, but we have entire communities in our country who are afraid of the police, and that really has to change. And I tried to write the book in a way that was inclusive to everyone or anyone who might pick it up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I really appreciated that. And the mentions that you had in the book about people of color and specifically what's been going on for a long time, but what we're becoming more aware of as a society.
Yep.
So, the book was written, you said, for teens and the adults who care for them. So I'm curious, how has this been received among teens? Are you finding that teens are curious about this stuff? Are they picking it up and reading it, and how are they responding?
Well, it's interesting, because that was like one of my greatest challenges. One, obviously just finding the time between my family life and my professional life to write a book on complicated, nuanced subjects was, no small undertaking. But then who am I writing for? Because I want this to be, accessible to as many people as possible. So what I decided to do is to write the book as if a young person is the reader. So essentially any tween, teen, young adult can pick up this book, and I'm using language that they understand. I'm breaking down sometimes complex topics in very simple terms. And the benefit for the adult reader is that they'll understand it too, and it's an easier read on them. Because the reality is, it's difficult to get young people to read books in much of the time. Everyone's kids are different. And most of the time, it's going to be the parent or caregiver buying the book. And, what I say in the book, and if anyone has the book, it's in Appendix 6, where I really convey a number of ways to get this information to the young person you care about. Because, again, the parents are probably the ones buying the books. And there's a whole bunch of ideas I give there. And one of them is, depending on your kid, you can give them the book to read, a chapter to read, a portion of a chapter to read, or even a page to read, whatever you think is the most important part in a given chapter. And I know for my 3 sons, they learn very different ways. So one of my sons will not read anything. So I find other ways. Again, all the techniques I use are in Appendix 6. Another one of my sons will read an entire chapter. And then my 3rd son will read portions. And so, the feedback I've been getting from the young people who are getting it directly from the parent or caregiver or from reading it themselves has been very, very positive. They're finding the information, interesting, because it's things they just didn't know but were curious about. And I think they're getting a sense of comfort knowing that if things happen, the unexpected happens, they'll know how to handle it. But I'll say that many of them are saying, I don't think this is going to happen to me, but it may happen to someone I love. And so I'm glad to have that information.
Yeah, I think it comes across as very empowering. And it isn't talking down. It's presented in a very, I think, teen-friendly way, but in a way that engages them, through the design and illustrations. And yeah, it's just broken down in a very digestible way. We'll be right back after this quick break. Maybe I've watched too many seasons of The Amazing Race, but every time I have to go somewhere on the subway, I treat it like a competition. It's all about making the right gut decisions about which route will get me there the fastest. Sometimes those decisions get me where I'm going early, and other times my gambles don't really pay off. Probiotics can't help with most gut decisions, but if your gut needs a little support, Ritual has your back. Their Synbiotic Plus, a 3-in-1 supplement, has clinically studied prebiotics, probiotics, and a postbiotic to support a balanced gut microbiome. I've been using Synbiotic Plus for about 6 months now, and it's become a core part of my morning routine. I take the mini capsule every morning while making my way through my inbox, whether I'm at home or I'm on the road, because it doesn't need to be refrigerated. And the capsule itself is delayed released, which helps it survive the harsh conditions of the upper GI tract for delivery to the colon. And that's exactly where we want it to go. Ritual invested in a study modeling the human colon, which showed that Synbiotic Plus significantly increased microbial diversity and the growth of beneficial bacteria. There's no more shame in your gut game. Synbiotic Plus and Ritual are here to celebrate, not hide your insides. Get 25% off your first month for limited time at ritual.com/tilt. Start Ritual or add Synbiotic Plus to your subscription today. That's ritual.com/tilt for 25% off. During this month of planning and organization for big transitions, rhythms and routines have been absolutely essential for our physical and emotional well-being. So Green Chef nights are reliably and predictably a good night. We know the ingredients will be fresh and prepped, the instructions easy to follow, and the meal delicious. We're all still talking about last week's turkey tacos with mango chimichurri sauce, refried beans, and Monterey Jack cheese. Green Chef contributes to a healthy lifestyle with easy and delicious menus like fresh seasonal salads and grain bowls. And with over 80 weekly meal and market options, plus rotating options to suit a variety of lifestyles, whether Mediterranean, plant-based, calorie-smart, keto, protein-packed, gluten-free, there are always plenty of options to choose from. Whatever you select, you'll get farm-fresh ingredients, organic whole fruits and veggies, and premium proteins, all delivered straight to your door. I love those 4 words. Straight to my door. Oh, and one more thing I love about Green Chef, they have an app, which means it's easy to manage meal preferences and delivery from your phone if you want to. And I, for one, want to. I am in that mode where I'm making the most of little moments like waiting in line at the pharmacy or for the F train to pull into the station to tackle all of those to-dos. So the convenience of an app is key for me. Green Chef has a special offer for Tilt listeners. Go to greenchef.com/tilt50 and use code TILT50 to get 50% off plus 20% off your next 2 months. That's 50% off plus 20% off your next 2 months when you use the code TILT50 at greenchef.com/tilt50. Okay, so we talked about police interaction. I just wanted to go back to that for a second and just wondering, this is something that a lot of parents of differently wired kids are concerned about. I know that police forces are getting more training about how to recognize people who may be autistic or have other differences that mean that they're going to respond in ways that may be unpredictable. And I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on how parents of differently wired kids can best prepare our kids for interacting with the police.
Yeah, again, I'm really glad you asked me that. There's 2 police chapters, one on what your rights are under 4th and 5th Amendments. Do you have to consent to searches? Do you have to answer questions? And there's another police chapter and it's called Safer Police Interactions, what to do and not to do when you get stopped on foot or when driving by the police. And in that latter chapter, I have an entire section, probably 4 or 5 pages, that's dedicated to interactions with the police and those who have disabilities. And it's a really important part of that chapter because we see, so much about police violence and perhaps the violation of the rights of people of color and the poor. But there's not enough discussion or, I think, awareness about the many, many challenges that the police and the people they're policing who have disabilities face during those interactions. And when you talk about violence that is inflicted by the police on the people they're policing, so much of it, disproportionate amount, involves people who have disabilities. So it's a huge issue. And one of the things, that's starting to change in some cities and jurisdictions better than others is that the police are getting more training. The police are asked to do a whole heck of a lot. And despite, some of the things I say, I make very clear in the book, at least I think I made very clear, that I am supportive of the police. I have many police officers who I'm close with, and I admire what they're doing. But that doesn't mean things don't need to change. That doesn't mean things don't need to be improved upon. And when it comes to interacting with folks who are differently wired, there is a lot that needs to be changed. And one of those, again, is there is more training that's being provided. And, one of the things I mentioned in the book, and, there's too much for me to cover just in this moment, but one of the things that parents of children with certain disabilities are doing is they're bringing their children to the police station. They're introducing them to the police. And, it's probably a good idea to call in advance. And they're having their children interface with police officers. And perhaps more importantly, having the police officers interface with their children to have an understanding that different people need to be policed differently. And the fact that someone isn't responding to their commands in that moment may not mean they're being disobedient or disrespectful of their authority. And so I think it's a two-way street that the teaching with both groups so that they can have a mutual understanding of what they're going through and what's expected of them and the challenges that they may be facing.
Another chapter that I found particularly interesting was the chapter on street safety, which is, really about street smarts, especially because, again, a lot of differently wired kids, they can have challenges when it comes to reading certain situations and kind of understanding what's really going on, or, they're just not maybe spacing out, so not as plugged in. Can you talk a little bit about that chapter and maybe what some of the biggest considerations are?
For sure. And just you bringing that up made me think of a previous question you asked about, what's the response from teens about the book and the chapters. And what's interesting is that, the teens, by and large, they understand why they have to have sexual consent. They may not understand the details and nuances, but they get the need. They've had a friend who's been in an abusive relationship and so on and so forth. But the one topic that I just think there's a disconnect with them is on street safety. They just, going back, I'm 49. I remember obviously as a teen and many of my friends, we didn't think anything bad was going to happen to us. We didn't think we could get physically hurt. That stuff wouldn't happen to us. And we all know that's not the case. And I think, many young people just think they're always going to be physically safe. And I have to remind my own sons, you're fortunate enough to live in a relatively safe neighborhood, but, anything can happen anywhere. And I don't know where your life travels are going to take you. And obviously, when you're talking about young people who are differently wired, that adds a whole other dimension to it. So the most important thing in the street safety chapter is situational awareness. There's no more important aspect of personal safety than understanding that. And situational awareness is simply to know what's going on about you as you go about your daily life, and you rely on your eyes and your ears and your intuition. And practically what that means is, when you're going about your daily life, you periodically get your head out of your phone, or just, if you're having a conversation with someone, instead of looking at them, you just look around for a second, literally just a second, and see if everything's normal around you. And maybe it's just you're buried in your thoughts, and you just look around you. Does everything appear normal? And what I always emphasize is that, when people sometimes say that, you're being paranoid, it is not about paranoia at all. You don't expect anything bad to happen because it's very unlikely that anything bad will be happening or anything will be out of sorts around you. But you simply realize that it is a possibility. And the beauty of situational awareness is that it gives you, in the event of a man-made disaster, a natural disaster, it gives you a 1 or 2 second head start. And in a situation in which, there's risk of bodily harm, 1 or 2 seconds is a very meaningful, or can be a very meaningful period of time. So being situationally aware is huge, and it's really not hard to do, and it's an important life skill.
Yeah, for all of us, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of times that we're walking around, and we live in a big city, and walking around, and sometimes coming across some characters that don't particularly feel safe. And so usually when I'm walking with my teen, he's assuming that I'm the one doing all that looking out, right? I'm the one kind of scanning,
sure.
Right? And so I try to even just say, like, once we're past that situation, like, did you notice that person? Like, how did that make you feel? It felt a little certain to me. That's why we crossed the street or whatever.
That's huge. I'm so glad you said that, because I feel my sons are doing the exact same thing. We go riding our bikes a lot, particularly, during the coronavirus pandemic. And I see, like, when we're riding, across the street at a green light, I'm always looking left, right, left, even when it's green. But they're not. And I say to them, guys, don't rely on me. Don't rely on me to be looking. You guys got to look for yourself. And you talk about, how did that person make your son feel? And that's such an important question, because another part of the street safety chapter is about your intuition and the power of your intuition. And your gut instinct when it comes to your personal safety is almost never wrong. And to trust your intuition is so important. And the problem that we face when it comes to relying on our intuition is that even though it's almost always right when it comes to trying to keep us safe, it's a whisper. It's not always going to be a loud alarm bell. But if we can tune in to listen to that whisper about why that person just doesn't make us feel right, and we may not have a rational explanation. We may not be able to explain it, but we feel it and we know it in our gut. And when we can listen to that little whisper, it can keep us so much safer.
Yeah, so good. We'll be right back after this quick break. Hey there, it's Debbie. I love making this show and sharing conversations about how to support our awesome neurodivergent kids. I've seen how even one little insight from an interview can spark a big shift in daily life. But I know that raising complex kids can be messy and lonely. And just when we think we figured it out, something comes up that boots us right back to feeling overwhelmed and stuck. That's why I've poured everything into creating a way for parents like us navigating complex parenting journeys to join together and chart a path that feels positive, hopeful, and doable. It's the brand new Differently Wired Club experience. In the club, you'll get personal support from me and other seasoned parent coaches, 6 live calls every month where you can connect and get your personal questions answered, the opportunity to learn directly from authors and experts like I have on this show, monthly themes for getting specific and tactical, an exclusive private podcast feed, and the best, most generous community of parents. Seriously, these folks show up for themselves and each other, and that right there is really everything. Because it's a daily reminder that we're not alone. Our kids aren't broken, and we have totally got this. The recently rebooted Differently Wired Club is on a brand new platform with its very own iOS and Android app. It is such a great space. However you learn, whatever your style, no matter the ages, genders, and neurodivergent profile of your children, the Differently Wired Club can help you cultivate the positive shifts you're hoping for. Join us today by going to tiltparenting.com/club. That's tiltparenting.com/club. I hope to see you on the inside.
If you like this show, there's a decent chance you'll also enjoy the Shameless Mom Academy. Hi, I'm Sarah Dean, the founder and host of the Shameless Mom Academy. The Shameless Mom Academy is a podcast for moms that centers moms more than it centers your kids. I'm not going to teach you how to make baby food or how to make your 3-year-old or 13-year-old stop having tantrums. Instead, I'm going to bring you back to yourself. For the last 20 years, I've been helping moms through growth and transformation. Inside the Shameless Mom Academy, I help you identify who you are and who you are becoming. Look, motherhood is hard. It brought me to my knees many times and sometimes still does. Returning to who I am and who I am becoming allows me to decide how to show up in all those sticky motherhood moments, but also in all my other relationships and in all the ways I show up in my various communities. So come check out the Shameless Mom Academy wherever you listen to podcasts, I'm willing to bet you'll leave feeling a little inspired and maybe even completely fired up. And you'll probably laugh a few times because I promise we never take ourselves too seriously over here. With 700 episodes to choose from, you're likely going to find something that sparks and speaks to you inside the Shameless Mom Academy.
So you talk about cyberbullying and digital safety. Could you talk a little bit about the digital footprint? I just think that this is such a critical topic right now, especially as our kids and teens are spending so much more time online. What would you say are the biggest takeaways or maybe the most important lesson when it comes to our kids' digital footprint?
Absolutely. What's interesting is that the book came out this past October 2020, but it took me 5 years to write the book. Again, I was juggling a lot. But I've been speaking, via Zoom or at schools or in private events, for about 5 years as people heard about what I was doing. And it's very interesting because the last couple of years leading up to the pandemic, I spoke about, sexual violence, misconduct, consent, police interactions, and so on. But in the last year or so, I'd say 80% of my speaking events are on digital safety, because you're absolutely right. With these people spending more time online than they probably ever have, being on lockdown, and they were spending a fair amount of time before, it's so much easier to find yourself, doing something that, maybe you shouldn't have done, or being a victim to someone out there who's looking to cause harm to them. So when it comes to specifically your digital footprint, that's essentially your digital reputation, what you do online from the first time you clicked, what you've liked, what you shared, and not just on social media. It could be in a text or in an email. That is, again, your digital reputation. And once you click send or share, there's no getting it back. And it's going to exist somewhere out there longer than we will. And, we have to be incredibly mindful, as adults too, that, we share things that are the best reflection of who we are. And, so much of the time when I see, a young person sharing things that were ill-advised and come back to bite them, it can be because, someone made a mistake, they shared something, they didn't mean to, they reshared something that they didn't mean to. But I got to tell you, more times than not, it's because they trusted somebody with information or an image, and that person turned out to be someone, unfortunately, that they couldn't trust, that they didn't know at the time. And so it's incredibly important for young people to preserve the integrity of their digital footprint, to just, first and foremost, don't ever put anything digitally in writing or in an image that you wouldn't want, your worst enemy to see, that you wouldn't want, your mom or grandma to see. Just don't put it out there. And then once you've taken care of that, that's a huge part of preserving the integrity of your digital footprint, to just not push out anything that could make you look bad. But let's be proactive. Let's populate your digital footprint with which things that are the best reflection of you. And I'm not talking about phony stuff. I'm talking about things that are true to who you are. Put things out into your digital footprint that, are positive, an award you received, a recognition, volunteer service, doing something that you love, that you're passionate about, because it's very likely that sooner or later, either it's a college administrator or a potential employer will be digging into your digital footprint. And yeah, you don't want anything bad in there, but use this as an opportunity to shine. Use this as an opportunity to show them what you've got and why you'd be a great person for that employer or the college.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'll just say, I was just flipping through the book, this section as you were talking, and, you have a whole chapter on sextortion, which I had never heard that term before. I'm sure that I've seen TV shows where this happened. Fictional characters have had someone, try to extort them or blackmail them because of a compromising photo they have. But, again, like reading that as a parent is super uncomfortable. And it just, to me, underscores the importance of making sure that we don't miss the opportunity to talk to our kids about this stuff, because the ramifications could be so huge for something like this happening.
Oh, for sure. And it's interesting you bring that up about sextortion, because out of the 11 chapters, titles, the sextortion chapter is easily the one that the fewest people know of. I get that all the time, Debbie. Like, I didn't know anything about sextortion. I didn't even know this was a thing. And that's scary to me because, sextortion, which is online sexual blackmail, according to the Department of Justice, is the fastest growing crime online against young people. And the average age of a sextortion victim is 15 years of age. So you're talking about a crime of not only unspeakable brutality, but you're talking about a crime that specifically or most of the time is targeting, and the victims are young people. And, there's a lot to know about sextortion, but in a simple way for your listeners, the way sextortion happens is commonly when a perpetrator, and I use that term very broadly right now, gets a nude image of a young person. And it could be a nude video or a compromising image that the young person won't want widely disseminated. And the perpetrators are, people online looking to sextort young people. And that could be from catfishing, which is essentially having a fake online persona where they trick a young person into some sort of online relationship. And then when the young person trusts them online, they share a nude, and then that nude is used against them. If you don't meet me for sex or send more images or send money, I'm going to release that nude to the world and tag all your friends. But the more common way that a perpetrator, at least, sextortion is just starting to get studied by academics. So there's still a lot we need to know. But the early research indicates that the more common way young people are sextorted is through in-person relationships. So the way that would look or sound is they're in an in-person relationship, things are going well, and they decide to share a nude with the partner they trust. They go to break up, and the partner says, if you break up with me, I'm going to release that nude and tag everyone you know. Or another variation, if you don't come back to our relationship, I'm going to release your nude and tag everyone we know. And again, it's a crime of unspeakable brutality, and it's something that there are specific things, and I list them in the book. There are ways to help protect ourselves from being targets or victims of sextortion, and getting in front of it, and first, of course, knowing it exists is the first thing we should be doing.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Such good information. And, I hope listeners are not panicking, but just kind of realizing, okay, there are some things here that should be on my radar in order to protect our kids. Let me ask you, just as a way to wrap up, what is your biggest hope for this book? Your intention for writing it and your why came through, but did you write it with a big goal in mind, or your ultimate hope for how this would support families?
Yeah, I wrote it because, as a dad, and with my experience and training background, I was frustrated. The schools my sons go to are great schools, and the teachers are wonderful. By and large, they're wonderful. But there's not enough of them. There's not enough money for the teachers to have the resources they need. There's too many standardized tests. And even if they wanted to, they can't get to the non-traditional, generally speaking, the non-traditional school subjects like math, history, science. So I wrote the resource I was longing for. And I want, I'm not the only parent, obviously, who wants the best for their children. I'm obviously not the only parent who has concerns about, okay, well, I got a new driver. Are they going to know what to do and not to do when they get pulled over? Because sooner or later they're getting pulled over. So I wrote it because I wanted to, help families, and it's a passion project. I could tell you that there were many times when I was writing it, and it was, it was my first book, and writing a book, as you know, is really, really hard. And there were so many times I was like, oh, why am I doing this? This is so much work. I got so many other things to do. And it was a passion project. I wanted to put something out that didn't exist, that I knew parents would want, I knew caregivers would want. And really, I want to help young people. Coming of age today is no joke. Coming of age today faces different challenges, and in my opinion, more significant challenges than when I was coming of age. And I wanted to just help ease that transition as best I could.
Well, congratulations. Yes, writing a book is a huge accomplishment and pain in the butt, depending on where you are in the process. And so congratulations on this book. And can you let listeners know where they can learn more about you or connect with you if you're on social media?
Thank you. Well, my website is whattheydon'tteachteens.com. My email is jonathan@whattheydon'tteachteens.com. And the book, What They Don't Teach Teens, is available on Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, or anywhere they might buy books. I love getting questions on my site, and I love hearing from readers about how the information has helped them, how it's impacted them. And like I mentioned earlier, I teach this stuff remotely. Anything in the book I teach at various schools anywhere, and I'm always happy to get those requests.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for doing this important work and for just taking time to share it with us today.
Thank you, Debbie. It's been my pleasure. I really appreciate you having me.
You've been listening to the Tilt Parenting Podcast. For the show notes for this episode, visit tiltparenting.com/podcast and search for this conversation. If you like what you heard on today's episode, I would be grateful if you could take a minute to head over to Apple Podcasts and leave a rating or a review. Thank you so much for helping us stay visible so people who would benefit from the show can easily find it. If you want to support the show and help me cover the cost of production, please consider joining my Patreon campaign. To support the show, just visit patreon.com/tiltparenting. Lastly, if you aren't already part of the online community at Tilt, I invite you to sign up at tiltparenting.com on the box in the bottom where it says Join the Revolution. Every Thursday, I send out a short email with a quick note from me, a link to that week's podcast episode, and links to 5 stories from the news that week that are relevant to parents like us. Again, you can sign up and learn more about Tilt at www.tiltparenting.com.
If you're a parent, I invite you to join us at the Mindful Mama podcast, where it's all about becoming a less irritable, more joyful parent. With sometimes hilarious and always thought-provoking experts and friends, at Mindful Mama, we know that you cannot give what you do not have. And when you have calm and peace within, then you can give it to your children. I'm Hunter Clark Fields, and I can't wait to see you there. Listen in to the Mindful Mama podcast.